Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. It's great to be here today. It's a pleasure for me. So I'm here today to speak to you about the topic of customer lifecycle management in quite a bit of depth. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart. But before we jump into the fun stuff, I just wanted to share with you a little bit about who we are and what we do. So how many of you have heard of OLX or Naspers? Okay, that's pretty good. Sometimes when asked that question, not many hands go up in the air. Some people say we're the largest internet company you never heard of. But essentially, Naspers is originally a South African-based company that was founded more than 100 years ago. And today, it's one of the largest investors in internet and technology businesses around the world. The market cap is, depending on the time of the year, it's around $100 billion. The segments that Naspers invests in indeed includes classifieds, which is what we'll talk about today, but also education, video entertainment, food delivery, and the list goes on. OLX Group is indeed one of the world's largest classifieds network around the world. Our mission is to connect buyers and sellers and to enable them to buy or sell almost anything, literally from anything from a post stamp to we've sold airplanes, I think, on our platform. So it's a very, very broad network. A bit more about the OLX Group family. Some of our brands. We segment our business into horizontals and verticals. So some of our largest brands on the horizontal side include OLX itself, which covers most of the emerging markets world, from Latin Asia, Africa, Middle East, and so on. Letgo in the US, Avito in Russia, Dubizo is our brand in the UAE. And then some vertical-based brands focusing around real estate, property, motors, and some specialized verticals. For example, we have a fashion vertical, heavy machinery vertical, services, and Cellency is actually a business we just acquired. I think it was announced yesterday, which is a France-based furniture home decor marketplace. So indeed a very vibrant, very colorful family of brands and marketplaces. Our global footprint predominantly covers emerging markets. We do have some presence in the US, like I said, with Letgo. But as a company, as a strategy, we tend to focus on emerging markets. We're present in over 40 countries. With almost in all of them, we have physical presence in offices. More than 5,000 employees, of which over 1,000 in product and technology developers. And just to give you an idea of our scale, over 350 million monthly active users. So that's the scale that we're dealing with. I'm part of OLX Ventures. Ventures is the investment arm of OLX Group. So what we look at is essentially our mission is to unleash innovative and disruptive marketplace models to complement and synergize with the OLX business. So if you represent or you're connected to such a marketplace business, please come have a chat with me. I'd be happy to discuss with you. So, jumping into customer lifecycle management, what is it really? I mean, CLM, CRM, CLV, customer lifetime value, there's a lot of buzzwords here, but I'm curious, does anybody have a definition or have heard of this term before? Anyone? Okay. How would you define it? Yeah. 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 Optimizing for the customer lifetime value, indeed. So there isn't really like a proper definition or textbook definition. The way I like to think about it, and I'm going to throw a lot of new terms here, which I'll talk about throughout the rest of the presentation. It's all about treating, quote unquote, treating your customers in the right way, in the best way possible, in the life cycle stage that they're in. So this is a conceptual slide that looks at a high-level life cycle where you start as a visitor to your platform, you become a first-time user, and the goal essentially is to turn you into a returning, loyal fan user. And to do that, to help you go along that journey and increase the lifetime value, we want to essentially interact with you in the best way possible through the right, we call them treatments. And the treatment can be a marketing interaction, can be a product interaction, can be a customer support interaction, and the list goes on. So I'll explain a little more about these. The way we do it at OLX, we've essentially built an in-house capability that is global in nature. Like I said, we have a very large geographical footprint. So in order to do this kind of lifecycle management at scale for all of your brands and businesses, you really need a machine that scales and automates. And this is the conceptual way of how that's done. So we start with our platforms and data, so on the very left. So you have your transactional databases, your clickstream data sources, and so on. And the first thing we really need to do is to clean all of that up and consolidate it into what we call the single customer view. So you have a nice structured database of all of your relevant customer activity, their historical behavior, some segmentation, and so on. Once you have that, you can begin to understand that behavior. You begin to analyze and extract insights from the historical behavior of your users. On the basis of that, we put together an actionable segmentation, which is a very important part of the whole capability. Once you have the segmentation, you can define the treatments that you want to interact, that you want to use to interact with your customers. And like I said, that could be marketing channels like push, email, SMS, and it could be product interactions, it could be retargeting campaigns, and can be customer support, phone campaigns, and so on. There's a number of things that you can do here. Then you execute those treatments, and then you get the response and the feedback from the user, and you kind of close the loop, and then you optimize and polish the system in order to drive up the value for the user. So conceptually, that's the how, that's the machine. But stepping back, why are we doing this? What's the business challenge, or what are we trying to solve here? So this is actually a real data from one of our markets, and it's probably not an unusual dynamic for any marketplace. I don't think this is unique to classifieds or particular vertical or OLX or particular geography. What you'll see is that you pay to acquire a bunch of users. The majority of them may not convert to become a first-time user of your product, and of those that do convert, majority of them are actually not going to come back, let's say 3 or 6 months later, to become a returning repeat user. So that's the challenge we're trying to solve. By fixing this problem, we can actually grow the business tremendously. So our view of the customer life cycle is this. At a high level, what we want to understand is your behavior from the touch point of when you enter our product and our platform, all the way to when you, unfortunately, if you leave the platform. So we start with your first download. We go through, you become engaged with the content. Then what we call a trial user is somebody who, in the context of marketplaces, either lists or responds to a listing for the first time, and that's a very important milestone. Then as you grow your activity and engagement, you will become a repeat user, so that's the user that keeps coming back. And if we start to lose you, so that there's various degrees of churn. Passive is somebody who's still on the product, but they've stopped listing, they've stopped contacting sellers, perhaps they're just browsing around, but they've essentially begun to become disengaged. Dormant, you can think of it as a short-term churn, so temporarily inactive, and lost are those people who we've lost permanently. So essentially what we try to do is increase the engagement on the left-hand side and reduce churn on the right-hand side, and ultimately the goal is to focus on converting users into the repeat category as much as possible. So once you do this in a data-driven way, you can really start to understand what I call the leaks in your business, right? So you can begin to see the cohorts and how people and users move from one stage to the other. And again, this is a real example with some real numbers from one specific marketplace. And there's real challenges here. You'll see some of these numbers are quite high. From a novice user, you jump straight to dormant, so you never become repeat, and that's 88% of the users. Once you get to dormant, 90% of those become lost permanently. There's a few people that come back, but from repeat to dormant at 60%. So there's a lot of leaks at various stages in the life cycle pattern. And so what we do is we create initiatives, we create treatments targeting these specific pain points, and we try to understand why is the user leaving us, or why are they behaving this way, and how can we help them to either fix the issue or encourage them to stay. So let's look at another real-world example. This is one of our markets. You know, on the face of it, great story, 3 times growth. You know, at the beginning, 2.4 million users in our database. 6 months later, 3 times more users, 7.5 million users. But the actual picture is a little bit different. So if you exclude inactive users, your starting point is actually 0.7. Then you pay a lot of money, essentially, to acquire 5 million people through offline, online marketing, etc. But then you lose almost the same amount of people. You know, they churn away. And you end up with a little bit more than what you started with, but certainly not 3 times more. And in the process, you've spent a lot of cash. So it starts to look a bit like this. You know, your business starts to look like you're putting flowing water into it, but it's gradually leaking from the bottom. And what's worse, you're actually literally throwing money down the drain because you are spending all this, you know, money on marketing, online and offline marketing. You know, maybe you thought that your cost per acquisition is $10, $20 per acquisition, but if you account for repeat users, it runs into the hundreds. By the way, if you are trying to make enemies in the company, this slide works really, really well. When I created it 4 or 5 years ago, when I started at OLX, we kind of shook things up a little bit because it was the beginning of us understanding from a data-driven point of view, how does the whole life cycle of the customer look like. So it did create some interesting reactions. Now, once you figure out where those leaks are, you can begin to further segment your users into what I call an actionable customer segmentation. And each of these boxes is essentially a pocket of value, a pocket of behavior that represents similar users. It doesn't really matter the actual definitions. You know, for your business, it might be different, a completely different segmentation. I think what's important is that you do have some segmentation that actually represents your customer base, that allows you to understand and assess behavior over time and to measure how the health of your customer base evolves. And more importantly, what it really allows you to do is to interact with those users through, as I said earlier, treatments. The concept of the next best action, right? So if you're in a particular segment, from a ideally both internal business perspective and customer-centric perspective, you have the next best action. So if you're a browsing user, but you've never listed before, well, the next best action for you is, if we believe that you're a potential seller, is to convert you into one. So what we try to do is run treatments and interactions that encourage you to become one. Perhaps once you've become, let's say you've left us, you've churned temporarily, well, the next best action is to reactivate you through some value-adding interaction so that you can become a repeat customer again. So that's the basic framework and basic idea, right? We segment the users, we track their behavior over time, their life cycle, and then we target them with value-adding interactions along the life cycle to make sure that their lifetime value goes up. Right, so what is a treatment? I mentioned value-adding user interaction, and I would add to add at the right time, the right place, with the right message. And these are important concepts. So what we want to do is reach out to you at the right time. So it has to be a specific, maybe action that you performed, or a trigger. Maybe it's maybe a seasonal timing rule, but something that makes sense for you as a user. It needs to be done through the right place or channel. So is it a marketing channel? Is it a product channel? Is it a customer support channel or other? The targeting aspect of which segment are we going to target with this particular treatment? Which of the 30 or 40 segments that I showed previously is actually part of the treatment? The what, the content. This one is very important because, traditionally the way marketeers, perhaps a basic marketing approach would be to, send out a campaign to the whole user base with a static copy. So what we try to do here is actually personalize the message, include personalized information, whether it's actual platform content or user-specific personalizations, so that your treatment is unique. It's not the same as the other user next to you. So it's in a way trying to micro-target and micro-personalize the user experience. The how is the sort of the layout, the design, the interactivity. So if we're talking about an email, then how does it look like? How does the branding look like? What does the layout look like? If we're talking about a product treatment, then where exactly in the product do we include that? And probably most importantly, the why. Why do we do it? What are we trying to optimize for? We can do all this stuff, but unless we have an objective that we can measure, a KPI, and a next best action, then it's done in vain. So we need to keep an eye on why are we doing these treatments and how do we measure if they're successful or not. So if you define these dimensions, you essentially have a treatment, and I'll give you a few examples. So here's a push notification example this is from our Dubizzle business, our Dubai-based marketplace. So it's an example of a push notification for a potential buyer or a repeat buyer. We're sending them a recommended property. So this is based on their past behavior. We believe that this particular property is right for them. And we use recommendation engines and machine learning algorithms to get to this content. It's done at a particular time, in this case 2 days after the last interaction of the user with the app. It's a rich media push notification with a button, so you can go straight to the platform and contact the seller. And the goal that we have in mind here is essentially buyer conversion. So we're trying to encourage the buyer base to become more active through offering them relevant and personalized content. Here's another one, so a little bit simpler. Like I said, in some of our markets, we're in emerging markets, so SMS can be still quite a relevant channel. This is an example from India. Similar idea as the previous slide, but of course less visual, less interactive, but essentially personalized messages. Email, a few examples here. You can be a bit more creative, of course, with email because you have a lot more real estate space. You can put lists of recommendations, you can put mini landing pages, and essentially almost use email as a extension of the product by putting in relevant, personalized content for the user. Some of the stuff is like rewarding and tips and calls to action. Some of it is actually content. Some of the other ones are around giving you tips and onboarding experience. So again, depending on which life cycle you're in, depending on your past behavior, some of this stuff might be more relevant or useful to you than others. Another example, this is done off-platform, so this is retargeting on Facebook and Instagram. Shed is our fashion marketplace. I think this is an example from Spain. So what's happening here is that we've seen you browse these items before. We think that you're interested in them, so we're retargeting you again with a personalized individual recommendation outside of our product. So this would be an example of a customer who's at risk to churn, and we want to bring you back into the product. And all of this stuff is data-driven, automated, scalable. And I think probably one of the more interesting examples is in-app or product treatments. So you can extend this idea of marketing communication to the product itself. So you can say, if you're a let's say exploring buyer, we show you a particular widget below a particular element with the appropriate personalization. So you can have multiple variations of your product experience depending on the life cycle of the customer, depending on what their needs are at the time. So this makes the possibilities for your product UX are quite interesting. Yeah. AI is very important when it comes to the recommendation engines, right? So you want to, you want to make sure that if you've browsed, let's say if you're interested in mobile phones, such as the example here, and we know that you want to buy a phone, then we want to recommend to you phones and brands and price ranges that you're interested in. So we do that through recommendation engines that are built with AI. Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through the details, but I showed you individual examples. But essentially, what you do is it all adds up to a very long list of treatments. This is an example from one life cycle stage, which I believe is the exploring one, all the segments within it, and then you have, let's say, a list of 10 push treatments or so. But as you add it up all together across channels, you might end up with a framework of easily hundreds of treatments. Multiply that times the markets that OLX is in, over 40. So you're dealing with a very massive life cycle management setup. So optimization is important, both at the micro level, individual treatments. You can optimize the copy, you can optimize the landing page, you can optimize the timing rules, the targeting rules, and so on. But also holistically, right? You need to make sure that your messaging approach, your communication strategy with the user is consistent, right? If you're saying one thing through email and another thing in the product and a third thing in push, then the user gets confused. So what you need to do is essentially manage the whole setup holistically as much as you optimize individual campaigns and individual treatments. And what I've shown here is that certain channels are not relevant in all of the stages, right? So you use retargeting only when the user has left the platform, and likewise you would only use product treatments once they're still in the product. So you would need to think about also which channels are relevant for each stage. Right, so what does that ultimately do for your business, right? So it's a lot of work, it's all cool, sounds great, but what is the business impact? So the way we measure the results is by looking at each treatment's KPI, and again, we have different KPIs that we optimize for. We measure the conversions that we're interested in, and we compare that to a control group, which is very, very important. So it's a bit like an A/B test, right? So maybe you have 10% of the user base that you don't run lifecycle management for, and then for the other 90%, you run it, and then you measure the conversions for both groups, and based on the difference, you can essentially, in a data-driven way, understand the impact, the uplift, as we call it, that you have for each of the relevant KPIs. And this is quite a common picture where you get double-digit, even triple-digit results for certain KPIs. So the impact can be quite high. So a couple of words about how to do this, if you're interested in building this sort of capability for your business. Lifecycle management, or CLM, is really a multidisciplinary capability, so it's not a traditional function. I don't think of it as sitting on the marketing or on the product or on the data. I think it's really a collection of things, and the way we've tended to organize CLM teams at OLX is by essentially tapping into each of these areas. So you do need a bit of a strategic mindset to think about the overall business holistically. You do need strong data, BI, and data science capabilities, because the whole thing is really, really data-driven. You do need product and tech, because you will be building APIs, you will be integrating with products, and so on. And of course, you do need some marketing experience, because a large part of it is marketing channels. And as an example, in I would say, a small to medium-sized organization, this would be one way to organize. Essentially, I would suggest to place that cross-functional, let's call it center of excellence, under a data-driven leader in your company. So it could be the CPO or the CMO. It doesn't really matter who the owning function is, but somebody who can be a strong sponsor. And then within that, you have three let's say, sub-teams. So you have the analytics team who's in charge of building your data setup, your data warehouse that needs to enable the lifecycle marketing, the segmentation work, and so on. The analysis of the results. Your product team, who will be in charge of building APIs and the relevant integrations with the product. And your marketing team, who is creating the campaigns, optimizing them, writing the copy, and so on and so forth. My recommendation, if you indeed decide to build something like that for your company, it really needs to scale with your business's resources and talent. So starting with what I would call basic marketing automation, right? On these dimensions, maybe you have no segmentation or very simple segmentation. Maybe you just look at buyers versus sellers, let's say. Very limited personalizations, and essentially using third-party marketing tools to run your CLM. And your main channels would be the most fundamental marketing channels like push, email, and so on. Once you move to personalized marketing, things get a little bit trickier, right? So you do need now more sophisticated segmentation. You do need some shape or form of personalized content, so recommendation engines become important. The engine that you use to generate your treatments every day, it's best if that becomes in-house. So you need smart data people to generate those treatments based on the rules and definitions that you've created. The channels are essentially the same, so you're not yet dabbling with product, but essentially you've made your whole marketing setup much more intelligent. It's one-on-one, individually personalized communications that's targeted. And your team is extended beyond marketing specialists to include data engineers, data analysts, and data scientists, because that's the talent you will need to do this. And the end state, which I would call full customer lifecycle management, is when you actually begin to integrate with your product. So beyond the marketing channels, you start to include lifecycle experiences in your products. Your segmentation becomes more advanced, your recommendation engines become more advanced, and you extend the channels to include retargeting and in-app channels. And of course, you need to extend the team to include product and tech specialist as well. So that's my last slide. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
If there's any questions, I'll pass this mic.
Yes. Yeah. There's so many out there. I don't know if I should, we can speak one-on-one if you'd like, but I don't want to become necessarily to advertise any particular product. There's companies out there that specialize in building sort of out-of-the-box, off-the-shelf, basic marketing automation products. You can be very successful just using that, right? But once your business scales and grows, and you want to become much more customized, and you want to reflect the business model of your company in a much more flexible way, that's when I think in-house becomes important, because you will at some point start to feel limited by what the off-the-shelf product can do for you. Have a chat with me. I'm happy to talk to you. Yeah.
Hello.
To lower your costs and? Yeah. Yeah, I think, what you'll find is, like I said, some of these tools are really great, but they can be also expensive. So you will probably reach a certain point where you're paying a lot of money to send emails and push messages and etc. through third-party tools. So at some point you will naturally find that you're incentivized to invest to build things in-house. And actually, it shouldn't be an extra cost. It should be a cost saving for you. You would have to invest in a few more people with the right type of skills, more data scientists, data engineers, etc. But I think you will find out that actually the cost saving will be there by just switching away from expensive third-party tools doing this stuff for you. So I don't think, I think it's a natural incentive and a cost saving that will happen organically as you scale. Yeah, I mean, if you've just started your business and you're an early stage startup and you don't have millions of users yet, there's little value in personalizing and doing really advanced CLM. So maybe it's okay for you to do some basic lifecycle management, but as you grow, then that becomes more and more important. So yeah, you will wait a bit before you go to the more. You wouldn't start on the right-hand side when you're just an early stage startup.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any differences? Hello here. Do you see any differences in horizontal marketplaces and the verticals in efficiency?
Yeah, indeed. So this capability we developed originally for our horizontals. So that's how we started. I think when you go to verticals, things get a little bit trickier because a lot of the customer base on the supply side are professional users. They're businesses. If you're doing a car marketplace or real estate marketplace, then you're dealing with essentially agents and dealers. So their kind of CLM blends a bit into CRM, where you have a much more intimate connection with the customer. This stuff is great for large scale user bases where you're dealing with literally millions of users, where you cannot talk to them by calling them or by having a personal relationship. I think the key difference with verticals is that on the supply side, you do have that more personal, more intimate, direct connection with some of the customers. But having said that, I think the effectiveness, the results that you can create on the buy side at least is quite similar. So we've done this for fashion, in our fashion vertical, and we've seen quite strong results there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
So, thank you. My question would be, can you tell me something about the success story behind, like first question, and why wouldn't you spread such a cool concept and brand to other countries? Or was it kind of like acquisition of your company buying some local startup?
Let me start with the second. So this was a in-house capability built by OLX, which was rolled out to all of the OLX markets, right? So we rolled this out into 40 plus markets around the world, which was actually the reasons why we had to build this kind of thing, because doing it manually or through third-party tools would have been very, very expensive.
But with different brands, or was Avito like everywhere?
Now, if you talk about the marketplace itself, Avito is in Russia. We use OLX branding in most of our markets around the world. And like I said on the slide, we have also Let Go and Dubizzle as part of the horizontal marketplace assets. But yeah, I think I'm not sure I understand the question, I think.
That's a pretty good answer to my question.
Okay, yeah. Yes.
It's great how you clarify the automated approach. And from my experience, it is very difficult to define at what stage. Thank you. It is very difficult to define at what stage the user currently is, like how to define the boundaries between like exploring, onboarding, power user and user who is maybe in the churn risk.
Yeah.
And how do you do it? Like, do you use gut feeling or do you use data to, calculate?
A bit of both, I think. So segmentation is as art as much as it is science. What we did in our case, just to go back to the segmentation, right? So for the top line, the life cycle, these were more based on, let's say, our understanding of our business and expert judgment. So we knew that there was a life cycle flow from kind of coming into as an acquired customer through to repeat user, through to churning user. And then the exercise was to define the specific milestones with specific data-driven rules, right? So for you to jump from 2 to 3, there is a specific action that needs to take place based on which we can put you into that bucket.
Exactly, and those actions is based on what actions the user made on your platform. And
Correct.
we just made it like by intuition. If user has, for example, made 2 purchases, we can call it him this group.
The ones on the top are easier because they're sensible, right? So a trial user is somebody who posts or lists, replies or posts for the first time. So that's how we define a first-time user. I think that's a kind of a common sense. I think the difficult ones, the ones underneath, where we actually did some statistical modeling to say, within the trial stage, what drives differences in lifetime value, right? And we looked at many different predictors, right? We looked at what category you're using, how often you're coming back, which geography you're in, whether you're a buyer or seller, how quickly you respond to buyer leads. Let's say 10 or so predictors, and then we built a lifetime value model based on which we could essentially cluster the users in each life cycle stage into the boxes that you see there. So that was done a little bit more, let's say, scientifically with a modeling approach. But at the end, you still kind of use judgment and common sense to keep it simple and not, in the end of the day, you need to get buy-in from management. So you don't want to make it too complex. So you try to balance that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. Cheers.